It is Tartarian Tales 17 time, and I'm going to keep the story going with Departure from Tartary and another chapter, The Tartar Ambassador at the Court of Cochin. And I'm not sure about you all, but I love the descriptions and the possibilities that these stories kind of allow to come into the mix of thought, because they are talking about just different religions that don't even exist anymore, different leaders, different rituals, different customs, different everything, jobs, pirates, crimes. Every single aspect is different of this realm. And it makes me wonder, this is one area where he travels and his course, and how about all the others? I wish that our author, Pinto, had actually had an army of people like him that were just traveling all over, inward, all up the rivers, just writing their stories down in his style, in his way, with his power, seeing them meeting the people of presence and honor that he gets to meet in just the adventure that he comes in. But there's only one, so take yourself back there. Here we go. Pinto in his departure from Tartary. We departed from the city of Taimacao on 9th of May, 1544, I-544. And that same day, just before dark, we went to spend the night at a seminary called Guatapimar, located within a pagoda by the name of Naipatim, where both ambassadors were warmly received by the Tuksevau, who was the rector of the school. At daybreak the next morning, they proceeded on their way down the river, each in his own boat, besides two others loaded with their baggage. 2 hours after Vespers, we reached a small city called Puxanguim, which was well fortified, with towers and ramparts constructed the same way as ours, and wide moats spanned by 3 very sturdy bridges of hewn stone. They had a large quantity of wooden artillery there, like ship pumps, except that the mechanism that struck the powder chambers was set in tracks lined with iron plates and fired the same type of cannonballs as the falcon and the half-sphere. When we asked the ambassadors who had invented that kind of projectile, they said some people called Alemanis, who came there from a country by the name of Musco, after crossing a large deep saltwater lake in 9 rowing vessels in the company of a widowed noblewoman from a place called Guaitor, who was said to have been banished by a king of Denmark, and that after she had found refuge there with her 3 sons, the great-grandfather of the present Tartar king had made them great lords and married them off to kingswomen of his, from whom the principal families of the empire were now descended. Interesting. The following morning we departed from this city and spent the night at another much nobler one by the name of Linksau. Continuing our journey down this river for 5 more days, on a Saturday morning we reached a large temple called Singwafator, surrounded by a wall that must have measured more than a league around, within which there were 164 long, wide buildings like warehouses that were filled from floor to ceiling with human skulls. There were so many of them in such large quantities that I am really afraid to mention it, not only because it is something that is hard to believe, but also because of the blindness of these wretched people and the error of their ways. Outside of each of these buildings were the bones belonging to the skulls inside, all stacked up so high that they towered more than 3 arm spans over the rooftops, in such a way that the structure itself remained buried under this mountain of bones, and only the doorway in front was visible from the street. On higher ground to the south, completely enclosed by 9 rows of iron railings, there was a terraced area that could be reached by climbing along 4 passageways. Within this terrace, standing upright and leaning against a very strong, tall stone turret, was a cast iron monster that was the most hideous, frightful thing imaginable. Judging by the eye, one would say that it probably measured over 30 arm spans tall and 6 broad, but in spite of its outlandish size, all of its members were well proportioned, except for the head, which was a little too small for such a huge body. Also, in both hands, this monster was holding a cannonball cast in the same metal, measuring 36 handspans around. We asked the Tartar ambassador to tell us what this strange monstrosity signified. If you only knew in what great awe this powerful god is held, and how important it is for you to have him for a friend, he replied, then you would willingly give all you have to him, rather than to your own children, and consider the money well invested. You should know that this great saint you see here before you is the treasurer, in whose safekeeping all the bones of all the people ever born have been placed, and that on the last day of days, when all men are to be born anew, he will give back to each body the bones it left behind on earth, for he can recognize everybody, and he knows exactly which one of those skeletons came from which body. As for anyone who is foolish enough not to honor him in this life, or not to give him alms, he will match him up with the most rotten skeleton he finds on the ground, making a permanent invalid of him, or he will give him 1 or 2 bones less, leaving him crippled, mutilated, or one-eyed. Therefore, heed my advice, make friends with him now, offer him something, and you will see how much benefit you will derive from it. We also asked him what was the significance of the cannonball the monster was holding, and he told us that it was meant to be thrown at the head of the ravenous serpent who lives in the concave depths of the house of smoke, in case he should try to rob those bones. After that, we asked him what the monster was called, and he told us that his name was Pachinarau dubeculum pinenfaqua, and what he had been born, and that he had been born 74,000 years before, from the mating of a tortoise named Mijanga with a seahorse 130 arm spans long named Tiber Mvukau, who had been king of the Gigiaos of Fanjus. And in addition to these monstrous lies and absurdities, he told us many others they believe in, with which the devil carries them all straight to hell, or as they call it, the concave depths of the house of smoke. This ambassador also assured us that the alms alone that this monster received from his devotees brought in an annual income of well over 200,000 taels, to say nothing of the income derived from the properties of the chapel tombs for the nobles, which by itself accounted for a much larger share of income than the alms, and that he ordinarily had 12,000 priests whom he fed and clothed, whose duty it was to pray for the dead to whom the bones belonged. These priests never left the compound without the permission of their chisangues, whom they obeyed, but outside the walls there were 600 servants who procured everything necessary for them, and only once a year they were allowed to break their vows of chastity within the walls, but outside they could do so any time and with whomever they felt like without committing a sin. They also had their retreats where they kept many women designated for that purpose who, with the permission of their libanguis or prioresses, do not deny themselves to the priest of this bestial diabolical sect. Some pretty intense imagery. Not sure whether or not to actually heed that warning and acknowledge that bone god, because maybe there is. And I've always thought there was something interesting about cremation and why it's being pushed so much today. I'd prefer to be intact and let the earth just take what it will. But who knows? You never know. They always have reasons for pushing certain things, and I've always been thinking that cremation lately, and this has got me thinking again that, cremation is a bad thing. May not have to do with this god that they were talking about, this monster, but something there. So either way, I'm going to keep going, not going to talk too much. I'm going to get 4 chapters later in the book. We get taken to the Tartar ambassador at the court of Cochin. So he says, having been informed by his ambassador of the presence of another of the court of Tartary, early the next day the king sent an honor guard to escort him from Agampur, the village where he was staying. It was headed by a brother-in-law of his, a very rich and valiant prince by the name of Pasilau Vakau, who was a brother of the queen, his wife. He arrived in a silver-covered coach with 3 wheels on each side, drawn by 4 white horses, all of them adorned with gold trappings. The fiambra, as they call this type of coach, had 60 footmen disposed in 2 ranks all around it. They were dressed in green leather and were all wearing swords and gold-plated scabbards that hung from their shoulders, and together with them were 12 mace-bearers. In the same order, marching at the outer edge of these ranks, were many other men with halberds adorned in silver, and kimonos and trousers made of green and brown silk, with their swords hanging from baldricks closely resembling ours. They were all stout-hearted men, whose stern and haughty looks, combined with their swaggering gestures, which were entirely in keeping with their natural arrogance, could not help but inspire fear in others. About 30 paces ahead of these guards went 80 elephants in very good order, with silver-trimmed seats and castles on their backs, their panoras, or battle swords, in their tusks, and good-sized bells around their necks. In front of these elephants, which were said to belong to the king's guard, rode another large group of men on horseback, with fine dress and trappings, and in the vanguard of this display there were 12 carts carrying silver tymbals with their silken saddle-cloths. When the prince, surrounded by all this pomp and majesty, reached the Tartar ambassador, who was already waiting for him, there was an exchange for all the compliments and courtesies that are customary among them, which lasted for a quarter of an hour. Following this, the prince gave the ambassador the fiambra in which he had arrived and mounted a horse, placing himself on his right and the king's ambassador on his left. Marching in the same order in which he had come, heralding their approach with many different kinds of musical instruments, they arrived at the outer courtyard of the king's apartments, where the Brochem, captain of the palace guard, was standing, waiting for him in the company of many noblemen, as well as a corps of mounted guards drawn up in 2 rows that extended for the entire length of the courtyard. After another exchange of ceremonious greetings, they walked up to the main entrance of the palace, where they found an old man more than 80 years of age by the name of Vuamisarau, said to be the king's uncle, who was waiting for them in the company of many lords and noblemen. In another ceremony, both ambassadors kissed the sword at his side, which he acknowledged as a supreme honor, after they had both prostrated themselves on the ground before him by placing his hands on their heads. Allowing the Tartar to walk nearly side by side with him, he led him down a very long hall until they reached a door at the far end. He knocked 3 times, and a voice answered from within, asking him what he wanted. In keeping with an ancient custom of true friendship, he replied in measured tone, "An ambassador from the great Zinarau of Tartary has arrived to seek an audience with the Prechao Guimiao, whom we all hold to be lord of our heads." With this reply, the doors were opened wide, and they entered with this prince, leading the Tartar ambassador by the hand, while the Brochem and the king's ambassador followed a short distance behind, and after them the other members of the party walking in orderly formation, 3 by 3. After passing through this hall, which was empty except for some guards kneeling with their halberds in their hands, we entered another much larger and more elegant hall called Naguintali, where we saw 64 bronze and 19 silver statues, all with iron chains around their necks. Amazed by the sight, we asked what it meant, and one of the Orkbos there, a priest, explained that the statues we were so surprised to see were the 83 gods of the Timucuhas, which the king had taken, after beating them in battle, from the great temple where they were kept. For the greatest honor, and the one that the king prized most, was to triumph over the gods of his enemies, whom he held captive in spite of their efforts. When we asked why they had those chains on them, he said it was so that when he entered the city of Huzengwe, where he was preparing to go, he would have them dragged by the chains that bound them, in a triumphal march arranged to celebrate the victory he had achieved over them. Passing through this hall of the idols, we entered another where we saw a large number of very beautiful women seated along the walls, some working on embroidery and others playing musical instruments and singing, which was indeed a delight to behold. And in another hall farther on, where 6 women mace-bearers stood guarding the door, there was the king, accompanied by some elderly men, though few in number, while the rest of the people present in the hall consisted of young women playing their instruments, as they had accompanied a chorus of little girls. The king was sitting on a raised platform like an altar, 8 steps high, beneath a canopy supported on balusters, and both canopy and balusters were completely covered in gold leaf. Kneeling beside him were 6 little boys with scepters in their hands, and a little farther back was an elderly woman with a heavy string of beads on her neck, who was fanning him from time to time. The king must have been about 35 years of age, a handsome man with big eyes, fair well-trimmed beard, a stern face, and severe mien, who gave one the impression of being a great prince, one of grandeur, not only in state, but in everything else he presented. As the ambassadors entered this hall, they both prostrated themselves on the floor 3 times, and after the 3rd time, his own ambassador remained face down in the middle of the hall, while the Tartar went forward until he reached the dais where the king was sitting. Climbing the first step, he addressed him in a voice that all could hear. "O Otinau cor valirate prece con pano, of the forces of the earth," he exclaimed. "May the sweet breath of the Almighty God, who created all things, cause the state of thy grandeur to prosper, so that for 1,000 years to come the sandals on thy feet will be like strands of hair on the heads of all the monarchs of the earth, making thee like to the flesh and blood of the great prince of the silver mountains, by whose command I have come to visit thee in his name, as thou canst see from his mutra, to which his royal seal is affixed." Looking at him, his face beaming with pleasure, the king replied, "As is his desire and mine, may the sun with the gentle warmth of its bright rays smile upon this true love until the ocean has ceased to roar, so that the Lord may be praised forever in its lasting peace." To which all the lords present in the hall responded with one voice, "May the one who created the day and night so grant it." Then the women resumed their playing, and the king said nothing more until he was about to withdraw. "I shall read the letter of my brother, the Sinarau," he said to him, "and I shall reply according to thy desire, so that thou mayest depart happily from before me." Without a word in reply, the ambassador again prostrated himself at the foot of the dais, touching his head 3 times to the step on which he was sitting. Then the Brochem took him by the hand and led him to his house, where he stayed for the entire 13 days he spent there, up until the king's departure for Huzemgwe. Another great tale of royalty and of customs and of the language and the way they speak. I absolutely love the things that they say when they refer to like the gods, and they refer to the divinity, and their lives were just like based on glorification of the divine powers and the divine like presences and thoughts and their theories. And it's just, everything is grand, everything takes like, it's just such a description of great, awesome stuff. I love it. I can't say enough. And I wish to God we could hear the music that these women played, and just to see a glimpse of a scene of like what these people looked like and what everything seemed like or felt like. To just travel back in time and experience it somehow firsthand would be absolutely incredible. But this is as close as we can get. So I hope you guys like it. I got some more coming your way. Again, I'll keep it going. Don't worry. Have a great day, everybody. Bless you all.